When we think about ancient Egypt, we imagine the pyramids of Giza, the incredible artefacts of Tutankhamun's tomb and mummies. But one of the lesser known parts of their culture was that cats were considered incredibly valued, as were other animals. Animals were an important part of the ancient Egyptian culture, not just as pets but for religious purposes. After death, many people had their animals and pets mummified, in order for them to pass on to the afterlife. But inside the British Museum, and many other museums around the world, there are a number of these mummies of animals, including cats. But why on earth did the Egyptians do this? Cats inside of ancient Egyptian culture were really important. They were domesticated in the way that cats are today in the modern world, but they were also used to ward off mice and snakes, and deal with creatures that could be dangerous. They were also, to some, representations of the Egyptian kings or gods, and some people bred and sacrificed cats to the gods, and then had them mummified to symbolise their importance. Some Egyptians believed that cats had divine energy, and they treated them with great respect. There is some debate whether they were actually protected by law or not. Bastet, the cat goddess, was one example of a cat-like god, and after a cat had died, people would mummify them, as this was seen as an offering to Bastet, who was a war goddess. A cult grew around her, and this was centred around Thebes, and started in the Ptolemaic period. Cats were bred to become offerings at times, and many died tragically from strangulation and breaking their necks, being bred to be slaughtered so they could then be offered to the gods. The cat would then be mummified, and the bodies during this process would be dried and then filled with soil, sand and other materials for the packing of the corpse. They were then either positioned with their arms folded towards their body, or they were left sitting, and in some cases standing, as if they were lifelike. The wrapping was very intricate, and was similar to the way that the Egyptians mummified people. To begin with, cat mummies were put inside of sarcophagi or coffin-style boxes. Some of these were incredibly expensively decorated with paint and even gemstones. The thinking behind this was that the gods would be pleased with such an offering. Now, one thing to mention is that the Egyptians also mummified other animals, but most of them were cats. As the different tombs were raided in the 19th and 20th century, with archaeologists discovering some of the most incredible artefacts linked to pharaohs such as Tutankhamun, they came across hundreds of thousands of animal mummies. Most, as mentioned, were cats, and it was said by one archaeologist that the plundering of the cemetery was a sight to see, but one had to stand well windward. The village children came from day to day and provided themselves with the most attractive mummies they could find. These they took down to the riverbank to sell for the smallest coin to passing travellers. The path became strewn with mummy cloth and bits of cats' skulls, and bones and fur in horrid positions, and the wind blew the fragments about and carried the stink afar. Huge amounts of cat mummies ended up being sent all around the world, and they were so plentiful that an English company brought 180,000 of them, and then had them ground up, and then spread over farm fields as fertiliser. Let's remember, that was ground cat. Thousands of years old, ground up, mummified cat. Yuck. Now, I wouldn't want to be eating the potatoes fertilised by that. One thing to also mention is that the colour pigment known as mummy brown was very popular with artists and painters in the 19th century, and this was made from, ground up mummy. Human and animal. It was also used in medicine too. Imagine that, people eating thousands of year old mummified animal to cure a headache. In 1907, the British Museum received a collection of 192 mummified cats dating from 600 to 200 BC, and using more modern technology, they discovered that the cats were deliberately killed before they reached the age of 2, being used as an offering to the gods. It wasn't just cats that were mummified though. In 2001, a skeleton of a male lion was found that had been subjected to this, and dogs were also given this post-death treatment. Much as we love animals and cats today, the Egyptians did too. There have been cases of cats found mummified with their owners, with the presumed belief that in the afterlife the family will be reunited with their pets. Cats appear frequently in Egyptian murals, and in artefacts such as huge statues. And with this we also have writers, such as the Greeks, who mention the Egyptian worship of the animals. But the story of the mummified cats of ancient Egypt is much darker than you'd think. Millions were bred to be offered as sacrifices to the gods, particularly the war goddess Bastet, and there was actually a thriving trade in cat mummies. Now, this has been History of the World, and I hope you've learnt something new. If you have, hit the subscribe button.